What American investigators discovered in Japanese laboratories after World War II was so disturbing that parts of it remained hidden from the public for decades. Inside abandoned facilities in occupied China, investigators found pressure chambers, surgical equipment, preserved organs, plague research documents, and records describing experiments performed on living human beings. Not by criminals, not by uneducated fanatics, but by military physicians, scientists, researchers, men trained at some of Japan's most respected universities. And unlike the Nazi experiments exposed at Nuremberg, many of the people responsible for these experiments were never punished, because what they knew had become valuable. In this video, we'll examine the rise of Unit 731, the experiments conducted inside its laboratories, the evidence uncovered after the war, and the secret deal that helped bury one of the darkest programs in modern history. Before we continue, if you enjoy serious historical investigations into the stories history tried to bury, consider subscribing to Battlefield Nightmares. We tell terrifying truths that were hidden from you. Now, Manchuria, 1936. This is the story of Unit 731. Viewer discretion is advised. This documentary contains historical material, descriptions of wartime atrocities, human experimentation, and disturbing subject matter that some viewers may find unsettling. The content is presented strictly for historical and educational purposes. This video is intended for adults only. To understand Unit 731, you first have to understand Imperial Japan in the 1930s. Japan was rapidly expanding across Asia. Military leaders believed the empire's survival depended on conquest, resources, and absolute military dominance. Nationalism intensified. The military gained increasing control over politics. And within that atmosphere, some Japanese officials became obsessed with the idea of biological warfare. One man in particular drove that obsession. His name was Shiro Ishii. Ishii was not a conventional military officer. He was a physician, microbiologist, and researcher. Intelligent, ambitious, charismatic. By all accounts, he possessed extraordinary energy and an almost fanatical belief in science. But Ishii also believed that biological weapons represented the future of warfare. He argued that if diseases could be weaponized, entire armies and cities could be destroyed more efficiently than through conventional combat. To many military officials, the idea sounded monstrous. To Ishii, it sounded practical. By the early 1930s, Japan had occupied large regions of China following the invasion of Manchuria. This occupation gave the Japanese military something invaluable for Ishii's ambitions: distance from scrutiny. Far from Tokyo, beyond the oversight of foreign journalists and international observers, Ishii began building a secret research network dedicated to biological warfare. In 1936, the Imperial Japanese Army officially authorized the creation of what would become known as Unit 731. The facility was constructed near the city of Harbin in occupied Manchuria. From the outside, parts of the complex resembled an ordinary military research installation. Inside, it became something far worse. The compound contained laboratories, prison cells, operating rooms, crematoriums, incubation chambers, animal testing facilities, and manufacturing plants capable of producing biological agents on a massive scale. Thousands of personnel worked there: doctors, nurses, scientists, engineers, military guards, technicians. And beneath the language of scientific progress and military necessity, an industrialized system of human experimentation quietly emerged. The prisoners brought into Unit 731 were not treated as human beings. They were referred to as
Maruta. Logs. The term was supposedly used to disguise the program from outsiders by claiming the facility was a lumber mill.
The experiments conducted inside Unit 731 were not random acts of cruelty. They were systematic, documented, organized. Every procedure served military objectives. Researchers studied plague, cholera, anthrax, typhoid, frostbite, dehydration, blood loss, and biological contamination. And unlike many wartime atrocities committed in chaos, these experiments occurred in controlled laboratory conditions. Subjects were observed, measured, recorded. The most infamous experiments involved biological weapons. Prisoners were deliberately infected with diseases so researchers could study how pathogens progressed through the human body. Some prisoners received contaminated food or water. Others were injected directly with bacteria. Doctors documented symptoms with clinical precision: body temperature, organ failure, internal bleeding, time until death. But perhaps the most horrifying procedures were the vivisections. Prisoners were surgically dissected alive, often without anesthesia. Researchers believed anesthesia might interfere with their observations. Internal organs were removed and examined while the subjects remained conscious. Limbs were amputated to study blood loss. Some organs were removed and repositioned elsewhere in the body to observe physiological changes. To the doctors conducting these procedures, the victims were not patients, they were data. And because they were viewed as enemies of the empire, the physicians involved convinced themselves that ordinary morality no longer applied. One former member of Unit 731 would later describe the atmosphere inside the laboratories as disturbingly routine. Doctors discussed experiments casually. Staff ate meals after procedures. Researchers compared results. The horror became normalized. Another major area of experimentation involved frostbite. Japanese forces fighting in northern China and near Soviet territory faced extreme winter conditions. Military officials wanted to understand how frostbite developed and how frozen limbs could potentially be treated. Prisoners were forced outside in freezing temperatures. Their arms were exposed until the flesh froze solid. Researchers sometimes struck the frozen limbs with sticks. If the sound resembled wood striking wood, they concluded the freezing process was complete. Different thawing methods were then tested: hot water, open flames, natural thawing. Many victims died. Others were permanently mutilated. The experiments continued anyway. And then there were the field tests. Biological agents developed inside Unit 731 were not confined to laboratories. Some were deployed against Chinese civilians. Aircraft dropped plague-infested fleas over villages. Contaminated materials were distributed in occupied regions. Water supplies were poisoned. The uncomfortable truth is this: Unit 731 did not emerge from nowhere. It emerged from ideology, military fanaticism, racism, and the belief that scientific advancement justified moral compromise. Imperial Japanese propaganda portrayed conquered populations as inferior. Chinese civilians and prisoners were frequently dehumanized in military culture. And once a system teaches people that certain groups are less than fully human, experimentation becomes easier to justify. The doctors of Unit 731 did not wake up one morning as monsters. The transformation occurred gradually. Inside lecture halls, military academies, research institutions, where obedience to the state became more important than individual conscience, where scientific achievement became detached from ethics. and where career ambition fused with nationalism. Some physicians joined Unit 731 because they genuinely believed biological weapons could help Japan win future wars. Others were attracted by prestige, funding, access to research opportunities unavailable elsewhere. Inside the structure of authoritarian systems, ambition and obedience become dangerous combinations, especially when human beings are reduced to abstractions: a disease vector, a test subject, a racial enemy, a strategic resource. History shows that once people begin thinking in those terms, almost anything becomes possible. And that lesson extends far beyond Imperial Japan, because the danger was never confined to one nation. The danger is what happens when science loses its ethical boundaries. As World War II approached its conclusion, Japan's military position collapsed rapidly. American bombing devastated major cities, supply lines disintegrated. The Soviet Union prepared to invade Japanese-held territory in Manchuria. Inside Unit 731, panic spread. Military officials understood the consequences if the facilities were captured intact. Evidence had to disappear. Orders were issued to destroy documents, dismantle equipment, and eliminate prisoners. Some facilities were burned, records were shredded, witnesses were killed. But not everything vanished. When Soviet forces entered Manchuria in August 1945, they encountered evidence of abandoned research compounds connected to Japanese biological warfare programs. Investigators found laboratories, cells, equipment, medical instruments. And eventually, surviving personnel began providing testimony. The scale of the program slowly emerged. Meanwhile, American intelligence officers also became deeply interested in Unit 731. Not simply because of the atrocities, but because of the research itself. And this is where the story becomes even darker. Because unlike the Nazi doctors prosecuted at Nuremberg, many Unit 731 officials escaped trial. Why? Because American military intelligence wanted the data. Officials concluded that the biological warfare research conducted by Unit 731 might provide strategic advantages during the emerging Cold War. According to multiple historical accounts, deals were negotiated. In exchange for research findings and cooperation, many Unit 731 scientists received immunity from prosecution. Shiro Ishii himself was never tried for war crimes. Many former Unit 731 personnel went on to successful careers after the war. Some entered academia. Others joined pharmaceutical companies. Some held influential medical positions in post-war Japan. The contrast with Nuremberg was staggering. At Nuremberg, Nazi physicians were prosecuted publicly. Their crimes became symbols of medical evil. But much of Unit 731 remained hidden for years. Cold War politics had transformed atrocity into intelligence value. And once governments decide information is strategically useful, morality often becomes negotiable. For decades after the war, discussion of Unit 731 remained limited. Many records stayed classified. Some participants denied involvement. Others minimized the scale of the crimes. Survivors struggled for recognition. And because the story lacked a dramatic international trial equivalent to Nuremberg, public awareness developed slowly. But historians, journalists, and researchers continued uncovering evidence. Documents, confessions, military records, witness testimony. Gradually, the reality became impossible to ignore. Today, Unit 731 stands as one of the clearest examples of what happens when scientific institutions abandon ethical restraints entirely. The lessons extend far beyond wartime Japan, because Unit 731 exposed something profoundly unsettling. Education does not guarantee morality.
A medical degree does not guarantee conscience.
Scientific knowledge does not automatically create wisdom. Science is a tool, and tools reflect the values of the people using them. Without ethical principles, scientific progress can become extraordinarily dangerous. The physicians inside Unit 731 believed they were serving national interests. Some believed they were advancing medicine. Some justified their actions through military necessity. History has heard these arguments before, and history continues hearing them. That is why the story matters. Not because it belongs safely in the past, but because the underlying questions remain alive. How far should governments go in the name of security? Can scientific advancement justify moral compromise? What happens when human beings are treated as expendable for the sake of national interests? And perhaps most importantly, what protects society when educated professionals begin convincing themselves that ethics are obstacles rather than boundaries? Those questions did not end in 1945. The facilities of Unit 731 no longer operate. The laboratories have faded into history. Many of the buildings were destroyed. Many of the documents vanished. But the warning remains. Because Unit 731 demonstrated how easily science can become detached from humanity when power, ideology, and fear converge. It showed that some of history's greatest atrocities were not committed by irrational mobs alone. They were also committed by educated professionals, researchers, doctors, officials. People who convinced themselves they were acting rationally. And that may be the most frightening lesson of all. The danger is not only cruelty. The danger is ordinary people learning to see other human beings as problems instead of persons. Because once that shift occurs, almost anything becomes possible. This has been the story of Unit 731, one of the darkest secrets of World War II, and one of history's clearest warnings about what happens when science loses its conscience. If you enjoyed this investigation, subscribe to Battlefield Nightmares for more dark historical stories, hidden wartime secrets, and forgotten chapters of history. And remember, history does not disappear simply because people try to bury it.